In November 2021, 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley brought a gun to his high school. He killed 4 students and wounded 7 others. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Now, more than 2 years after that shooting,
we find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
His mother is also behind bars. This verdict is historic. It's the first time a parent's been convicted of such a serious charge for failing to stop their child from carrying out a mass shooting, testing the limits of parental responsibility. And because of that, there were a lot of people watching and waiting to see how this case would play out. Not least of which, the parents of the 4 students killed.
It was a combination of surprise and relief.
There was a lot of emotion back here and in the courtroom.
The people spoke, and to me that was important. That's our system at work.
In its opening statement, the prosecution argued Jennifer Crumbley didn't pull the trigger that day, but she is responsible for those deaths. And over the course of this 2-week trial, they convinced the jury.
When I finally heard that the verdict was guilty, my first reaction was, wow. I think we're just so trained to believe that there are certain legal principles that even if you think this could be the thing that does it, when it actually happens, you're still a little bit stunned.
So let's break down the argument made in court that led to that guilty verdict and why this case is so significant. Here's what we know about how the day of the shooting unfolded. On November 20th, 2021, Ethan Crumbley went into a bathroom at Oxford High School in Michigan. He pulled a 9mm semi-automatic handgun out of his backpack and walked into the hallway where he started shooting.
Today at yet another school, students, teachers, and parents terrified and scrambling after shots fired on campus.
But just hours before, teachers called the shooter's parents into a meeting because they were worried about his mental health. School officials told the court they found this math worksheet with phrases like, "The thoughts won't stop, help me. My life is useless," and drawings of a gun, a bullet, and a bleeding body. Teachers told Ethan's parents that he'd also been watching a shooting video on his phone that morning and recommended they take him to a doctor or a therapist right away. According to the prosecution, Ethan's mother, Jennifer, objected to that suggestion because she and her husband had to go back to work.
And the administrators asked the parents if they're willing to take him home, and they declined to.
Shortly after they left the school, Jennifer Crumbley texted her son, asking if he was okay. He said yes, and less than 10 minutes after that exchange, the shooting began.
Just the smallest of things could have saved Hannah and Tate and Madison and Justin.
A significant part of the prosecution's case in this trial was built around the argument that Jennifer Crumbley failed to get her son mental health treatment, despite a series of warning signs, and that if she had, these deaths could have been prevented. In legal terms, they argued she was grossly negligent.
A negligent person is somebody who may not have thought about something that was dangerous, but should have thought of something that was dangerous, that they ignored a risk that would have been obvious to an ordinary person.
They made that case in part by showing the jury Ethan's journal, which was filled with references to plans to commit a school shooting, including one entry where he wrote, "I have fully mentally lost it after years of fighting with my dark side. My parents won't listen to me about help or a therapist. And I have zero help for my mental problems, and it's causing me to shoot up the effing school." They also showed a series of texts he sent to his friend, where he talked about approaching his parents for help, writing, "This time I'm going to tell them about the voices, and I only told them about the people I saw." According to the prosecution, he also told that friend how he'd asked his parents for help before, but they had refused, and instead laughed at him and told him to, quote, "suck it up."
Your son told his only friend that he had asked you for help.
No, I don't deny that.
Okay. And you also don't deny that he told his only friend that you laughed at him.
I do not deny that.
The jury was also shown a series of texts Ethan sent directly to his mother, where he described seeing and hearing things in the house, including what he called a demon. He wrote, "I got some videos and a picture of the demon. It is throwing bowls. And I cleaned until the clothes started flying off the shelf." The prosecution also made it clear that according to cell phone records, it was often days before Jennifer Crumbley replied to these kinds of messages, if at all.
The defense fired back, saying the evidence provided was cherry-picked to paint a picture that did not resemble the Crumbleys' actual life.
They did what families do. The prosecution just had zero context because they had tunnel vision.
But it was the next part of the prosecution's case that may have resonated most with the jury.
I just feel like Jennifer didn't separate her son from the gun enough to save those lives that day.
You're the last adult to have possession of that gun.
Correct.
The jury was also told that just days before the shooting, Ethan's father, who is also facing the same charges as his wife, took Ethan to a gun shop, and he bought a Sig Sauer, a type of gun that prosecutors pointed out looks a lot like the gun Ethan drew on that math sheet.
That's the picture of the gun. It's not just any gun, ladies and gentlemen. It's the gun that they just gave him.
That day, he also got a case with 2 locks, a youth handgun pamphlet, and ammunition, and signed a form acknowledging that buying a gun for someone else was illegal. And yet, the prosecution argued Ethan went home and posted photos and a video about the gun on Instagram, saying, "Just got my new beauty today. Sig Sauer 9mm. Ask any questions, I will answer." The next day, his mother took him to a gun range. They shot at paper targets, then took the gun apart, put it back in the case, and went home. They both posted about the day on Instagram. His mom writing, "Mom and Sunday, testing out his new Xmas present."
It was for him to use at the shooting range. We didn't just hand him a gun as a "here you go, son." It was something he could use when we went to the range as a family together.
The day after they went to the range, teachers say they caught Ethan looking at videos of handgun ammunition on his phone. The school called Jennifer Crumbley, and in a text message exchange between her and her son about what happened, she wrote, "LOL, I'm not mad. You have to learn to not get caught."
Defense attorneys argued Crumbley didn't know about her son's deteriorating mental health and had no way to predict the shooting.
Of course, I look back after this all happened, and I've asked myself if I would have done anything differently, and I wouldn't have.
It was obvious that Ethan had access to the gun, the prosecution argued. And according to police who entered their home on the day of the shooting, it wasn't locked in the case. And remember, this is the same day Jennifer was called to the school because of these drawings on Ethan's worksheet.
She could have stopped at home on the way back from the meeting. She goes right by her home to see where the gun was. She could have stopped on the way back to work. She could have searched the backpack. She could have asked her son where the gun was. She could have told the school that they just gifted him a gun.
So what the judge is saying is, it's that an ordinary person would have looked at this situation and said, I need to lock up this gun. I need to keep this gun away from this young man.
After 11 hours of deliberation, the verdict was in. Guilty on all 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter.
The most compelling argument for the prosecution really was that there were just a million little places where these parents could have just done slightly better and saved 4 lives and stopped 7 children from being desperately injured.
From the beginning, the defense told the jury the bar the prosecution needed to meet to convict Jennifer Crumbley of involuntary manslaughter should be extremely high, and that this case, whatever the verdict, would set a precedent for all parents.
This case is a very dangerous one for parents out there. It just is. And it is one of the first of its kind. Can every parent really be responsible for everything their children do? Especially when it's not foreseeable?
That was a concern echoed by some watching this case too.
There are parents out there who know their child is struggling. There are parents out there who know their child is tempted by gang violence, or maybe struggling with alcohol and drugs. Maybe your child took a car for a joyride at one point. And I think even parents who are doing their best, somewhere deep inside have a kind of worry. At what point is this child's behavior his, not mine? At what point do I get to say, I did my best, but kid, this is your responsibility?
Many lawyers following this case believe the prosecution intended to set a precedent with this trial, to expand the scope of blame in mass shootings.
What we're really seeing is prosecutors who are looking for more aggressive ways to deal with gun violence in a world in which the political winds seem unable to step up.
It's not a matter of if this is going to happen again. It's when it's going to happen. And people need to wake up.
Now, with a guilty verdict and exactly what kind of precedent it sets.
Once you have one precedent, you have a prosecutor who has a new set of tools, who's going to be able to make an analogy. And the analogy might be to another extraordinary case, but it may also well be to a case that's slightly less extraordinary and then slightly less extraordinary and slightly less extraordinary. And I think we're all going to have to watch to see what the life of this precedent is going to be.
Jennifer Crumbley faces up to 15 years in prison after being convicted of all 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Sentencing is scheduled for April 9th. Crumbley's husband, James, is being tried separately. He faces identical charges and is scheduled to go to trial in March.